The Ferenczi Split. Written by PixelStortion. Narrated by Riker. Introduction. You need to know 3 people before this starts. My father, Dominic Ryker, and I don't usually call him father, so mark the fact. Growing up, I only knew of him, a name my grandmother kept at a distance, and she had her reasons, good ones. In public, he built towers and shook the right hands, and behind that, he ran something much larger, and he ran it one way, quietly, and he never touched the crimes directly, especially not the things that broke. His gift, if you want to call it that, was for building the rooms and the stories that shaped the choices a person had, until the only choice left was the one he'd wanted them to take all along, and then making certain it was someone else's name on the wreckage. It has never once been his. Isla's mother married Dominic, my father, so we became sisters, not by blood. She's a musician, successful now, though she wasn't then, but the volume remains. She takes the thing nobody will say and sets it on fire, publicly, standing on the bridge as it burns, just to be sure. I'm not being metaphorical. If the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, then she is a scary woman. And she reads people the way I read systems. 4-digit code. She'll read it from across the room, not off your screen, but off your hands, the small rhythm your fingers keep when they think no one's watching. It isn't a gift she was born with. It's what a child grows when reading a dangerous man correctly is the only thing keeping her safe. And for Isla, that man was her own father, in the house she grew up in, long before Dominic. The darker story sits right behind the talent, the part she has never once said out loud, and her songs carry more than hints of it. I mention it only because Isla arrives carrying things that make no sense until you know where they came from. Then, they make complete sense. I grew up a long way from any of this. Rural Australia, wide roads, my home. Gran and Pop raised me. Not grandparents in any way that mattered. They were my parents, the only 2 I count. And that house was the whole of my world. Gran was an industrial chemist. I call her chaos with a license because it fits. She was fast in all directions. She was the only person who ever truly understood me. And she built a laboratory in the middle of nowhere. I mean that literally. Red dirt to the horizon, an escarpment at her back, an hour of dirt road to reach anything, and there, a full commercial lab running. Not a retreat, a working operation. Contracts with the university down in Queensland, students and research assistants cycling through, and a few arrangements she never talked about. Government work, the quiet kind, the kind that leaves you with names in your phone you don't explain. A lab like that, out there, sounds far-fetched. That's the point. Gran only ever asked one question of a thing. Is it possible? If it was, then it was, and what everyone else believed about it didn't get a vote. Far-fetched isn't a fact about the world. It's a fact about other people's imagination. She never once mistook the second for the first. That's the thing she put in me, deeper than any of the chemistry. See what's actually possible, and don't let the room talk you out of it. The geometry doesn't change just because the view does. Everything I do with her hands. Pop kept everything standing, grounded, quiet, our rock. It was a good childhood, a real one. It ended at 17. A car, an empty stretch of desert road, and then police at the gate saying my name wrong. They called it an accident. I never have. Because whatever caught them out on that road is the same thing that reached in for me. The same world I'm about to walk you through. But I didn't go in empty-handed. Gran had left me something, for a day she must have known might come. A box in a bank up in Queensland, papers nobody was meant to keep, and a number. Federal. I made the call. Information only, just facts in a row the way she taught me. And then I did the only thing that the situation permitted. I moved to Sydney, to his world. I wasn't allowed to fall apart. I called it a choice, because the lack of one wouldn't feel right. Part 1. Dead Girl. This story is about Isla, not me. Somewhere in Surry Hills, on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of damp carpet and mold, a young woman knocked on a door she had knocked on before. The dealer opened it the way he always did, one hand on the frame and half a grin already there, his eyes moving over her arms and her jaw, and the tremble he read as withdrawal. But they moved a fraction too slow, and something in her formed its own direction before she could name why. He thought he understood her. He didn't. He understood the message he'd been given, though. Simple enough. She doesn't stay a problem. Not here. Never here. A swap, that was all. The right thing handed over as the usual thing. She went past him straight to the bathroom, hand over her mouth, shoulders down. He went back to his phone. Junkies threw up. Junkies shook. Junkies needed bathrooms. The messy cost of doing business. Inside, she took a small metal instrument from the lining of her jacket. It unfolded into a row of tools, and she chose one. The screws on the lock came out under her fingers the way they only do for someone who's done this 1,000 times before. Then she reversed the whole mechanism in one clean motion, barrel, latch plate, handle, until the lock sat on the outside of the door. Her hands didn't need her for any of it. She put it back together as quietly as she'd taken it apart. Flushed the toilet for the sound of it. Slit her jacket off and let the cold find her skin, priming the shiver before she'd need it. Then pulled it back on. She came out, trembling, apologetic. He offered her water. She asked for something stronger. He poured her one, another for himself, then 2 more, then more. She smiled at his stories, moved close enough that he thought the night had turned his way. She let him think it. She kept his glass full, and she let his bladder do the work. The bathroom door shut behind him. She turned the lock from the outside, and it caught, with a sound like a full stop. He was making noise now. But the door was strong. Junkies sometimes got violent. That was why it was strong. The reason, now, inverted. His phone was in the side drawer. She'd lifted it from his pocket 20 minutes earlier and left it there. She opened his recent calls. The last number answered on the 2nd ring. A man. Thick consonants. An accent she'd heard before. In the hallways of a glass house in Mosman. One of Dominic's psychos. She hung up. From her own phone, she opened the archive. Folders she'd built in the quiet hours when the house was still and the cameras mysteriously stopped working. His emails, his accounts, the shell companies, the cartels and the syndicates he played off one another, skimming from each, selling each one's secrets to the next, one group against another. A $20 billion empire built on the single confidence that none of them would ever compare notes. She attached the files. She'd stood at this edge before, many times, never jumped. This time, she pressed send. In the bathroom, he was still hammering, still shouting, still bargaining, the panic of a man who'd never had a plan, only a threat pointed at him. And that panic was the confirmation of everything she'd read in his eyes at the door. She picked up her jacket. Through the wood, she heard him say it. Dead girl. Small and desperate, more a thing he was afraid of than a thing he'd do. So she gave it back to him, corrected. Dead boy, out loud, to the empty room. And she smiled. She didn't know, as she walked down 4 flights of stairs, out into the amber of a Sydney evening, that the answer would come in hours, not days. That it would walk calmly through a front gate in Mosman and find me, her sister, in a glass house. Part 2. Something about dinner. I'd lived in that glass house in Mosman for 11 months. It sat over the harbor like a display case. My father's men, the ones Isla calls frontline psychos, walked the perimeter day and night. My brain stored the rhythm of this world, of these men, the way it stored everything since arriving here. Vigilance, it turns out, is not a thing you can choose to switch off when your brain decides that doing so might kill you. And then there was the house. Laminated security glass, 5 panels, bullet-resistant to 7.62 millimeter. Tensile rating consistent with AS 1288 structural glazing. Biometric gate. Proprietary locks. A compound, dressed as architecture. The rules were as clear as the crimes. Neither one lived on the surface. Neither one was ever said out loud. And all this is to say that the surface looked beautiful. My father, the wealthiest man in Australia and a pillar of the Sydney community, seemed to have given me and Isla everything people say they want. Beneath the gloss, however, terrifying. It was a quiet Tuesday. I was in the lounge when I heard him. Footsteps, unhurried, evenly spaced. The walk of a man who was meant to be there. No alarm. No broken glass, no raised voices from the perimeter. I came through the doorway, and he was already there, mid-sentence, behind the kitchen counter, as if we'd been in conversation for a while and I'd just stepped out for something. Black polo stretched across heavy shoulders, a white takeaway bag on the marble beside him, loosely knotted at the top. Tie. Lemongrass and chili already in the air. You must be Dominic's daughter. And he smiled. Broad, tanned, gray at the temples. A man who looked like he coached a rugby team on weekends. 5 armed personnel. Biometric entry. Laminated perimeter glass. Those variables do not produce a stranger behind my father's counter, with a bag that had landed wrong. My brain ran him against every template it owned. Guest, colleague, contractor, a friend of my father's I hadn't met yet. Each one almost fit. Almost. Everything about him moved with a smoothness that had nothing to do with ease. It was economy. The economy of a body trained to cut every wasted motion. He kept talking. The Thai place on Military Road, something about dinner, about not seeing Dominic in a while. The words filled the kitchen the way the lemongrass did. Warm, familiar, completely wrong. Distance to subject, 4.3 meters. Exit, behind me, 7. His heart rate, likely, below 60. Calm, friendly. Standing in a kitchen that wasn't his, talking to a woman he'd come to Kill. Mine had already crossed 140. I could feel it in the roof of my mouth. He reached into the bag. Still talking, mouth still moving, words still shaped like conversation, lemongrass still in the air. And his hand came out, holding something that wasn't food. Black polymer, short barrel, suppressed. My brain registered the shape and would not name it. Because he was still smiling, still talking. The bore found the center of my sternum. I classified it 3 times, rejected it 3 times. Because the man holding it was still saying something about dinner. And then, the sound. To his left, my right. Movement, sudden. And it pulled me out of the distance my brain had placed between me and what was about to happen. Part 3. His head. The bag still on the counter. Exactly where he'd set it. The lemongrass, cut now with something else. Ammonia. Hot copper. The white of the bag, flecked red. Some part of me had seen it. The wave that hit my eardrums. The air suddenly full of material. Wet particulate, hanging where his head had been, held there half a second, like rain that hadn't decided to fall. I didn't scream. Couldn't. The door to my right stood open. Men. Weapons. Clearing a space that had already been cleared. My father came in behind them. Hands at his sides, white shirt immaculate. He moved through the room the way he moved through every room, like it was completely under his control. Almost. He looked at the body. His face didn't change. He looked at the other parts, the consequence, the mess. Then at me. 5 seconds. I counted them. Looking the way he looked at everything, for the shape a thing would take next. 0 affect, no emotion, just inventory. I could feel the arithmetic running behind his eyes. Me, frozen, his 5 men back to the far wall. Me, reading it all back. One of them had a dark smear down his sleeve. It hadn't come from the floor. These were men who knew the only safe move was no move at all. Heads down, hands to the task. Nothing offered, nothing met. And my father, I had only ever seen him look like control. This wasn't that. 5 guards, a locked fortress. A man had crossed all of it, and his head had come apart milliseconds before my chest would have. That does not happen to my father. And yet, it had. So I did the thing I always do. The thing Gran built into me. I ran it cause to effect. The way chemistry runs, the same no matter who's watching. And I worked it backward to see where it closed. There were only 2 ways past his men. Money or fear. Those were the rules of the world he built. Simple. Until it wasn't. The gate reads a hand before it opens, and it opened. The men who could have stopped it didn't. And the man himself, for 5 seconds, looked like someone who'd lost hold of a thread he was sure he'd been holding. Maybe he'd allowed it and changed his mind. Maybe they had. Maybe my end was a price already agreed and then, too late, unagreed. Maybe it was none of that. Every version I built left something over. A remainder that wouldn't divide. Because whatever came through that gate could not be bought, frightened, or predicted. The one kind of thing his whole world had no defense against, because it was built on the certainty it didn't exist. And he'd never once been able to read me. The same way he'd never been able to predict Isla. 2 blanks. in a man who priced everything. Part 4. Behind Glass. The ringing had started in my left ear and spread across my skull like a frequency being tuned. Heart rate 182. Peripheral vision contracting. Sound reduced to one high, continuous tone. They were dragging the body toward the hallway. None speaking, heads still down. The kitchen had become a space behind glass, everything visible, nothing reaching me. My feet hadn't moved. My hands hung at my sides. The bag still sat on the marble, still flecked red. And into the space where my own mind had just gone quiet, something else stepped. I looked at my father as he walked off, already reaching for his phone. His certainty had wandered, briefly. Now it was back in his posture. And for a time I saw all of it through his eyes. A reflex. The way a body twists mid-fall to protect the spine. My mind reached for the only perspective in the room that wasn't afraid, and wore it. The man who came to kill me. A failed variable. The security detail, compromised assets. The body, a maintenance issue. The girl in the doorway, functional. His blood. His. Part 5. For the record, the men gone. The body gone. Something dark stayed in the grout, between two tiles. My father was in another room by then, the low frequency of his voice through the wall. A phone call. Instructions in the tone he always used. The adrenaline left in stages. First my hands, then my jaw, then a deep tremor in my thighs that made standing hard. I held the edge of the island, bent over it, felt the cold stone under my forearms. And I stayed like that until the shaking was only shaking, and not something worse. I had been watching part of a bowl one of the men had knocked on his way through for some time, 3 pieces on the tiles now, and one long curved shard of white porcelain had come away from the rest, still rocking, gently. Concave surface against flat plane. Oscillation decaying as friction takes the energy. I watched it, the way you watch the last ripple cross the water after something heavy has gone under. Because looking away meant looking at everything else. The porcelain settled. The kitchen went still. And somewhere outside, a ferry sounded its horn, and the low note crossed the water, met the bulletproof glass, changed its pitch just slightly, and faded. To him, I was what I'd always been, a safe variable, the estranged daughter, kept away until 17, then arranged back into place, a girl who would take whatever shape she was given. He was already wrong about that. Weeks before I walked through his gate, I'd made the call. Grand's number, information only, facts in a row. Not to save myself. Because I'd seen what he was, the lives he'd ruined. In his world, you move from money, or you move from fear. He had no column for someone who moves because it's wrong. Isla hadn't frozen. She'd been reckless, yes. Half a disaster, perhaps, but you couldn't buy her. You certainly couldn't scare her. My father's attempt at both only made her reaction inevitable, and his attempt at muzzling the problem backfired so severely that it would soon cause far more problems than a mild-mannered man with a gun to enter his kitchen. My reactions were different, but still outside of my father's charted map of how people behave. I'd moved in silence before any of this. 2 different ways of being the thing he swore no one was, because it conflicted with the thing he needed people to be, controllable. But still, I had frozen here, and I'd survived it, not because I'd done anything right. A sound to his left, half a second. A bullet. I lived on a margin I hadn't chosen and couldn't have counted on. And luck isn't a number you can put in the equation. It's the space where the equation should have been. That was the part I didn't want to forget. Not the fear. Fear I can work with. The freeze. At 15, at the edge of a 20-meter drop, I jumped where the other kids filmed. I didn't hesitate, not because it was completely safe, but because I saw a path that wasn't unsafe. The angle, the water, the depth, the margin. The numbers balanced, so I jumped. Still a risk. But in this kitchen, my mind never ran the numbers at all. My mind refused the process completely. Maybe there was no better move once the gun was out. Maybe by then, every number came back 0. But that's not where I failed. I failed at the start, when he was still just talking, when the signs were already in front of me. I read every one of them and let my mind file them somewhere I couldn't reach. I saw it coming. I stood there and watched myself be walked to the edge of it, and did nothing with what I already knew. Isla's brain didn't do that. The part of her fashioned by the horror she experienced as a child had saved her. A different kind of horror was now fashioning something similar in me. The freeze saved me in the end, but not on purpose. Standing there harmless, I looked exactly like the variable he'd already solved, and my father doesn't have time to watch the thing he's sure of. My body, giving out, got me classified as safe. It bought me cover I hadn't earned and couldn't count on twice. In that quiet space between what might have been and what would unravel, I looked at the cameras that never quite caught that corner of the kitchen, and I photographed what they missed. Then I was sick in the sink, and I shook some more. You'd say that order is wrong, backwards, fall apart first, be a person first. But both happened, in the same body, in the same minute, the horror and the record. They aren't opposites. I stopped trying to explain that years ago. Eventually, a courtroom would hear what me and the porcelain heard. Many years later, I'd sit in a quiet room and try to remember the exact moment I stopped being the person who froze and became the person who wouldn't.